Welcome to Birds of Virginia with Bridgewater College. I'm Dr. Robyn Puffenbarger. I'm the chair of the Department of Biology and Environmental Science here at Bridgewater College. And as you can see in front of me, one of the things that the college has is a bird skin collection. This is one of our great teaching tools, and it's also a wonderful thing to take out into our local communities and give bird talks with. Many people have never been able to see a bird this close before. It's not going to fly away, and I just want to take a second to tell you about the collection and how we get the birds. I do have to have a salvage permit. There is a U.S. law, the 1918 Migratory Bird Act, that made it illegal for people to take birds, their nests, or their eggs, or their feathers. This was in response to the plume rage for women's hats. We were literally going to make some of our birds go extinct because of a rage for fashion and bird plumes, bird feathers all over our hats. So this Migratory Bird Act does make it illegal to take the birds. Now there are exceptions. You can get a permit, of course, to go hunting. So you might hunt ducks or quail or grouse, but I can also get a salvage permit, and that allows when people say, hey Dr. P, there's a bird that died at my house, would you like it for the collection? I can legally come and actually take it and add it to the collection. Some of the birds that you see in front of me, if you're an alumni of long standing, this little junco right here is from 1953. So that's almost 2 decades older than me. So this might have been from the Doc Jobson era. So if you remember those days, maybe it was you who collected that bird for Bridgewater College. So I take the birds out to talk about the birds of Virginia, and Virginia is a great place to be a bird watcher. There's all kinds of things going on in terms of birds that live with us all the time and birds that come and go. We start by showing you birds that you might not necessarily see in your backyard, but birds that show the difference in the style. This bird, which is an American woodcock, was prepped to be a skin. It's laid on its back, it's flat, it has little cotton to replace the eyes. If you've ever taken someone on a snipe hunt, I know you thought it wasn't real, but this is a snipe. It's the Wilson snipe. Notice it was taxidermied. It has a glass eye, its beak was posed open, and here's even the little metal pieces where it used to sit on a log. So that's one of the key differences between taxidermy and bird skins. Prepped to last in cabinets. We have examples in some of the big museums across the world, things that have been extinct for hundreds of years. So scientists can even study bird skins. I mean, if we take good care of these, the ornithologist that comes, 2-3 times after me will still be studying these skins. So they do last a very long time. So let's look at a couple of birds that you might see in your yard. Here's your friend the mockingbird. They are fairly gray and nondescript. The female and male look identical, but they're the ones that are going to sing early in the morning and wake you up in the summer, and they are going to mock. They may know 200 to 300 different songs. One of course, my favorites, because my name is Robyn, is the American robin. This is a beautiful example of a male. He's darker in the breast and darker on the back. If the winters aren't bad, they won't leave. When you call somebody a bird brain, what you're really saying is they're super smart and highly intelligent, because birds are super smart and highly intelligent. But we have this thing about calling people these funny names, and it doesn't really have anything to do with the species. I did want to show this because this is one of the rarest things I have in the collection. This is also a robin, but it is leucistic. It's too white. It's not a true albino. You can see there's some color, but he's what we call piebald. He's got white patches all over. And that kind of abnormality in the feather coloration is fairly rare, and it's usually probably not passed on, even if it's genetic, because birds that look like this may have a really hard time finding a mate, because they don't look right. They don't look like the other robins. Another favorite of mine is the cedar waxwing. You see it looks like sealing wax at the tips of its wings. These birds you might see in flocks of 500 or 600 in the winter as they go to your hollies to get all your little berries. Another really incredibly beautiful bird is the eastern bluebird. And that color, I hope, is just coming through. It's just electric blue. This is the male. You can tell the males from the female. He's brighter on the blue and redder in his chest. And if you're lucky enough to live in the country, you might have bluebirds in your yard. They're one of the ones I don't have in my yard because I'm too urban right here. I'm literally on College Street right next to the college. Birds that we might not appreciate so much in our yard, this is the European starling. These are considered invasive exotics. They're not covered by the Migratory Bird Act. So if you had bluebird houses on your property and you're trying to attract the bluebirds, the starlings may try to take that nesting site. And because they are not protected species, you can remove them or their eggs or their nestlings to help protect the bluebirds. I really like showing these because even though the starling has a bad rap, he's really pretty. He's got some iridescent color. He molts and his feathers in the fall get these little white tips, but he doesn't have to molt those off to look beautiful in spring. The white wears faster than the feathers with the melanin, with the dark brown or black. And so it's really cool. They put the feathers on once but get two uses. So this would be the non-breeding and breeding plumage. Another one that isn't anybody's favorites are the house sparrows, again introduced from Europe. This is the male with the black in his throat, and this is his female. I know right now I have a flock of about 20 of these with their babies running around my yard, and they're not particularly a happy thing to have, but at least it's some biodiversity. But these are again birds that are not covered by the Migratory Bird Act, and they are very competitive with the bluebirds for the nesting sites. So if you know people who have bluebird boxes, you may see them removing the European house sparrows' nests or nestlings from those boxes to try to give the poor bluebirds a chance. Of course, our state bird is absolutely, top of the mark, right? Look at that red. That's the male cardinal. Here's his girlfriend, the female. So we call this in biology sexual dimorphism, when you can tell the male from the female. There's lots of birds you can't, but in this case you can. He is this really great red. One of the things I notice now when I look at the cardinals, and sometimes in the winter I might have 5 or 6 males at my feeders, they all look really good in red to me. But we have to remember, birds have 3 color cones in their retina, not 2 like we do. Or is it 4 instead of 3? I can never remember. It's 1 more than we have. And that means they see colors we don't know exist. So she's looking at that red and she can tell him apart from the other males, and she wants the best looking guy. She wants him to have a really vibrant red color because that's basically a true signal that he's a great male. He would make a great mate. And of course, don't let the birds fool you, right? We do all that stuff too about who's the mate, right? You got to do the rituals, you got to do the right things. One of my favorite birds that we will see all year here in the yard is the white-breasted nuthatch. This is one of the only species that you will see go up a tree to go look for the bugs in the bark, but it can also turn and go head down. So if you see something going head down the bark of your trees, you know you have a nuthatch. Probably the most common all across the state is this white-breasted one. They're here all year, but occasionally in the wintertime we get his little cousin, the red-breasted nuthatch. And I just think they're adorable. They sound like squeaky little tin toys like you'd get for Christmas. So they've got a really different sound. If you can work on your sight birding, identifying things by sight, but also with your ears, you'll realize you're missing a lot that you don't see because you'll hear more than you see. One of my favorite birds. Don't get a lot of the red-winged blackbird in my yard because I'm just too urban suburban. This is his girlfriend. She doesn't look anything like him. She's really nondescript. But he is just one of my favorites because when he comes in spring and sings cronkily, cronkily out in your cattails or in your little creeky area, wet area if you've got one, that just means spring has to be here because he only comes when it's spring. So hearing them just is such a great way to know that the seasons are changing. Okay, so we talked about some of the songbirds that we're likely to see in our yard. The next thing I'm going to show you are some of the raptors. These are birds of prey. They're going to eat other birds, mammals, or basically anything they can catch depending on their feeding habits. I wanted to start with the kestrel. This is the male American kestrel. He is just one of the prettiest birds. I think he could win a beauty contest anywhere in the world. That beautiful gray, this great russet back. Kestrels are also birds that use a nest box. So if you have the right property and you want to get rid of mice and moles and voles and insects, large insects like grasshoppers, put up a kestrel box. You may be very well rewarded with getting to watch their antics and their dear little babies as they raise them. They're just incredible. Kestrels in Virginia here all year and very easily seen if you're driving. I know, like when I leave Bridgewater and go out to get on 81 by the creamery, you'll often see them perched on the wires and they're looking down at the fields to find their prey. Another really common raptor in Virginia is the red-tailed hawk, of course, named. Now, this isn't red like a cardinal red, it's chestnut, so red-tailed hawk. These are stop and drop predators. They like to sit and look down. You'll often see them on the interstate when the leaves, you'll see them looking down into the median, and they're going to drop down on a rabbit or some other mammal. Right now in Bridgewater, almost every single morning, I am hearing hoo, 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 and that's our great horned owl, the largest owl in Virginia. They are exquisite raptors, great job as predators. I like hearing them because that means they're getting rid of the mice and the skunks. Most birds can't smell. They have very little sense of taste and virtually no sense of smell. Sometimes researchers find great horned owls because of the smell. They can smell the skunks that they've been eating. So hopefully that means the skunk population here in Bridgewater is going to take a dive because we hear them hooting. I'll tease when I see kids, are these the baby owls? And sometimes they'll say yes, and sometimes they'll say no. But these are full grown, so you can see the size comparison. These are one of the smallest owls in Virginia. These are the eastern screech owls. They're the ones, if you are walking around, like as the sun's starting to go down, and you hear the horse whinny, that's these guys. We have two colorations. We have the foxy red and the gray morph. We think that has to do with camouflage, but people haven't really worked out the genetics or done a lot of studies that help us really understand why there are two color morphs of this particular species. So you can't say this one's a girl or a boy because it's red. Either boys or girls could be red, either males or females could be gray, but it's just a color morph in this species. So sometimes when we look at birds, we look at their color and we maybe think they're more closely related because of how they look. So on the table you can see three blackbirds. I have the common grackle, very pretty bird, great color. I hope the iridescent nature of his feather coloration is coming through. But believe it or not, he's not very close cousins to the American crow or the common raven, even though he looks a lot like them. The closest relative is the blue jay. So these three birds belong to the family of corvids. Corvids are the most intelligent birds on the planet. They often work in family groups. They know each other. They know who's a cheater and who's a good friend and who always calls out when there's food to be had. I really like showing the American crow. He's a really handsome bird, big and black, but I could probably be tricking you. This could also be a fish crow. Both are found in Virginia. The fish crow is our friend from New York because he says and the American crow says caw, caw, caw. Really, the only way to tell them apart is by their sounds. But I think it's just fantastic to see the raven compared to the crow, because this is not something you're often going to see side by side here in Virginia. The crows are common. They're all over the state, very, very easy to find. The ravens in Virginia tend to be much more limited in their distribution. They're usually up in the mountains. They were not well tolerated early on by the settlers, and they were hunted almost to extinction in the east. Now if you go to the west coast, the same species, the common raven, will come down in a parking lot and take a cracker like a seagull will. They're very, very much tamer on the west. In the east, it's like they have a very long memory for being hated. The other thing I want to show you, you can maybe see there's these very fine bristles, what look like hairs under his beak. That's not hair, of course. Only mammals have hair. Those are modified feathers. Everything's a feather on a bird. There's no hair. So I just think that's really cool. So he's going to use these to help sense things near that great, and you see that great big beak. It's a really different look from our other crows, but we still have these very fine, fine bristle-like feathers. So I also want to show the woodpeckers of Virginia. We have a number of species. They start at the largest with this pileated woodpecker, or some people would say pileated. This is a male, not because his head is red, but because he has a red mustache. The female also has the red head, but she does not have red. So in birds, when you have that stripe, they call it a mustache, kind of like a person would have a mustache. I love seeing a pileated because if you're seeing pieces of bark and tree go flying and you're thinking, how come I can't hear that chainsaw? That's such a bunch of mess happening. It may be your pileated. He's gotten after a dead tree nearby. It's just absolutely incredible. Some people are not so happy about their flickers. I love those spots and this bright yellow. This is the yellow-shafted flicker. These guys are famous for getting on your house if you've got some metal and banging away and waking you up in the morning, maybe on a Saturday or Sunday when you wanted to sleep in. The drumming of the woodpeckers is a territorial thing. It's the males and females are saying, we've established this is our space, and we would thank you not to come to see us. This is our smallest woodpecker in Virginia. This is the downy woodpecker. The male has the little red on the back of the head and the female does not. They are very, very similar to the hairy woodpecker, and if you get to see the PowerPoint and PDF I made, I did some tricky bird IDs, and Cornell Lab of Ornithology has some great tips and tricks how to separate some of those really tricky IDs, like the downies from their cousins, the hairies. This is the red-bellied woodpecker. Now, a lot of people will say that's the red-headed because they haven't seen this. The red-headed is more common in far less urban settings. It likes more like woodlots, more unbroken habitat. Whereas the red-bellied is, unless you get really urban, really into a serious cityscape, you're going to find these in parks all over Virginia. The red-bellied, that's probably all you'll ever see of it. Unless you get a great look at one on the side of a tree, the red belly is almost invisible. But because there's a little bit of red on the head, people say, oh, well, that's a red-headed. But see, now you'll know better. The red-bellied, this is a female because of the break in the red. The male would go all the way across. The red-headed, you can't tell apart. Males and females have this same beautiful tuxedo pattern and fluorescent red head. One that I really enjoy and that does come to my yard, this is the yellow-bellied sapsucker. This is the only sapsucker that's common in the east. It does only come in late fall and usually only stays through early spring. It is the one that puts those tiny little perfectly round holes in your trees, in the trunks or in the branches. Because the holes are separate and not connected, that's not going to girdle and kill the tree. It's just going to let the sap run. And the sapsuckers are going to come back and drink the sap. Other birds are smart and know where the sapsucker has been. They're going to come as well. And they also use that spot to, the insects will get trapped in the sap and everybody will come eat insects. So this is another fun quiz time. Is this a woodpecker? Is it? It sure has a woodpecker beak, but it's not. This is our kingfisher. So this is our belted kingfisher. This is a female. She has an extra bit of cinnamon. Whenever you have a rule in biology, you always want to say most of the time. Most of the time the males are more colorful, but in this case it's the female who's more colorful. So it looks like a woodpecker, but it's not going to be found on a tree. It's going to perch on a branch, and it's going to dive head first in to get the little fish and catch them in its beak. And the other thing I like about our kingfisher, their nests are burrows into the side of a creek bed. So I know a lot of times you'll hear we don't want to see washout, we don't want to see erosion, but we do need a few eroded spots every so often in the creeks or rivers so the kingfishers have a place to nest. So we're to our last few songbirds or perching birds. One I enjoy. This is the dark-eyed junco. This is a female. The male would be more slate gray. These are birds only if you are up at very high elevation in the mountains of Virginia would you see in the summer. They do breed at the top of the mountains. For most of us in Virginia, the ones we see at our feeders are coming to us from Canada. So they're coming long distances to spend the winter with us. Some people call these snowbirds because of their white bellies and because they come when it's time to snow. Virginia is such a fun place because whereas juncos are going to come see us for the winter, the next two birds are only, of course, going to see us in the summer. So here's an indigo bunting. He has to be just about as electric a blue as any bird in the world. His mate is brown and white. She's very nondescript. And I really like the indigo buntings because they sing all day long, all summer. So they're singing fire, fire here, fire, fire where, up on a wire or a branch. And so that makes them very easy to find. Another of my favorites that comes to us in the spring and stays for the summer is the Baltimore Oriole. So this is the one that a baseball team likes a whole lot too. This is the male. He is more colorful than the female. She's more yellow than orange. These are famous for eating oranges. So some people put out half an orange as a feeder, or they put out grape jelly. I have never had any luck whatsoever with either of those tactics to get Orioles. When I have had wild grapes nearby, then I have had Orioles. They've come to strip the bark. They weave a nest that looks like a hanging basket in a tree, and then they come back for the grapes to eat them up. So I've really enjoyed getting to see the Orioles. The last bird is the smallest bird in Virginia, and I'm going to try to get it so you can see the color in the throat. This is our ruby-throated hummingbird. It's the only hummingbird that comes with any regularity to Virginia. It only comes in the summer. It is a nectar feeder, so it's going to be sipping the nectar offered by the plants. You can put out sugar water, and you can look it up online, like the Audubon Society or Cornell Lab of Ornithology would tell you how to do it right, and you could put out a hummingbird feeder. His throat is electrically colored. Now he has control of those feathers. He can actually flash that color. The female does not have that color. And he is just tiny. He makes the flight to Virginia from somewhere in Central America all by himself. There are all sorts of myths that he rides on the back of something else. No, no, no. He does it all himself. She does it all herself on their own. And you can see, from the size of my finger how just tiny this little bird is. One of the things people ask me all the time is, what's my favorite ID guide? And I have to say the National Geographic Birds of North America is the best. Now it is thick because it has all the birds of North America. It's not divided east and west. You can get smaller field guides. There's a number of them that divide the country east and west, and that can be really helpful, but birds from the west do come to the east, so sometimes you'll miss things that you could have seen. And I just also think that the writing and the illustrations in this particular field guide are fantastic. The college is going to provide a PDF with some other tips and tricks that I have. There's a number of apps now for identifying birds and for keeping your life list. So if you're more interested in some other things beyond what we got to talk about in the videos today, then you can go and look there. I live right next to Bridgewater College, and I have 1/3 of an acre in my yard. And you might think, well, how many birds can you really see in that small of a space? On average, we see over 70 species a year. We try to take care of the birds. One of the things we've done is over time we've gotten rid of a lot of the lawn. We've added areas like this where it's naturalized under the trees. We let the needles and the leaves come down, which support the insect population. One of the most important things you can do is provide water. So this would be an example of a little bit more expensive bird bath, one that's made out of metal. But if you want a really cheap, really easy idea, this is just a big plastic container. What it was made for was a big plastic pot for a plant. But you see how shallow it is? That's what birds like. Most birds can't swim, and they're utterly terrified of water. And so they won't go in if they can't figure out how deep it is. So something like this, even my smallest bird like a chickadee is not probably going to drown in. And then you just add a couple of small rocks to the water. They can land on the dry spot and then figure out if they can take a bath. You will never regret putting a bunch of cheap bird baths in your yard. I think we have either 11 or 13 because the water is so important. The North River is right there. It can't even be a 1/4 of a mile as you fly. But you have to think, my chickadee is this big. He's tiny, and between here and there aren't many trees if a hawk or another predator would be after him. So all of these water features make it safe in the yard for the birds. All right, so if you're making your yard more friendly for birds, you've got hopefully lots of shrubs and trees, and you have varying heights. Some things tall, some things short. That gives the birds cover. That gives them a way to get in here and feel safe. Next most important thing is the water. They've got to have water all the time. They've got high metabolism. Then start thinking about your food. So here I've got a couple of feeders. The most generic, best food for lots of birds is black oil sunflower. And this is like an open feeder where they can sit, they can have a seed or two, and there will be a bit of mess underneath. Here's another feeder where I would feed the black oil. If you don't like a mess and you want a hulless mix, that is available. You'll probably have to go to a specialty store, but it will cost you quite a bit more. Black oil sunflower tends to be one of the least expensive foods because it's in high demand. Lots of birders feed it. The cheapest food, if you're in an agricultural area, is cracked corn. You can get 100 pounds for $14. It's really cheap. But a lot of people don't like to feed cracked corn because it brings the grackles, it brings the mourning doves. I don't know if you saw, the bird wanted to come get a seed, but he saw us out here. So cracked corn can be a really cheap way to feed. But again, you'll have to kind of decide what your budget is, how many feeders you want to do, what you want to tackle. My husband and I have a long-standing agreement that this is one of our expenses that we're willing to do. So we feed corn, black oil, safflower, millet, thistle, and suet routinely. So we decided we would have a big bird budget. But we're big birders, and so that's what's a lot of fun for us.